For Louisiana versus all y'all, Jarrett Roser here today with Eric Held, the director of the LHSCA, the Louisiana High School Coaches Association, over there in the LHSAA office. And obviously it's crazy times. Everyone just kind of itching for answers that don't really exist just yet, and you guys trying to navigate things as best you can to work toward kind of a safe return to sports. So, Coach, appreciate you taking a few minutes to chat with me about some of these things. And how's everything been going? How much sleep have you been able to get this week, if any?
Yeah, that's a good question. Thanks for having me, first of all. But, yeah, the sleep thing, that's, as they say, it's overrated. I've never been a big sleeper. I mentioned to you before, I set the alarm every morning, but probably 6 out of the 7 days out of the week, I definitely wake up well before that alarm goes off. Anywhere from 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. it seems. Just a lot of things going on with the virtual clinic. And then, of course, the big thing is what's going on in the high school sports landscape around our state. And just like you said, trying to get those student athletes back to play as safely as possible.
I wanted to ask you, too, before we get into some of the more serious aspects that we were just mentioning, do you personally control the LHSCA Twitter? I want to know who's dropping the public enemy, don't believe the hype mantra when some misinformation starts floating around.
Yeah, that would be me. I'm a big music fan. Have been since the 70s, as far back as I can remember, riding around in my mom's car. She was kind of the carpool person, bringing me and my younger sister and then younger brothers to sporting events and for practice and getting us to school, and, you know, just listening to music on the radio, falling in love with music. And then that's kind of one of my side passions. So just kind of, I guess you could say I have an eclectic background when it comes to music taste, and I listen to everything and open-minded to everything. But yeah, that's me with the public enemy, don't believe the hype. So it just kind of popped in my head and put it out there. I thought it would kind of break the tension a little bit when it came to dealing with everything we deal with.
Yeah, when I saw that, I immediately smiled and said, "This is excellent for what they're talking about right now." With as I mentioned, there had been some misinformation at different points. Everyone's just so eager to find some kind of answers that things just start to kind of spiral. Sometimes away from what has actually been the communication, and that kind of segues, I guess, well into. I told you Neil Weiner over at Dunham had praised you for helping keep those lines of communication flowing and keep everybody as informed as possible through a lot of this, because there is such a hunger for answers and so many people so uneasy about where we are with all of that uncertainty. What has that looked like, just in terms of there are very limited answers still, but trying to keep the coaches and ultimately through them, the athletes and their families as informed as possible? How has that task worked for you guys?
Sure. So just going back to when everything kind of got shut down, a few days after we left the Burton Coliseum, you know, that Friday afternoon, there were championship games, and that morning the executive committee made the decision to close the gym and close the arena to fans for Friday and Saturday's championship games. Then we came back to the office, and it was, I believe, Wednesday when we were told to go home, and we kind of had the stay-at-home order. And a few days into it, it just like for everybody, it just kind of felt surreal. A few days more went by, and it was, you know, hey, we're not at work, we're working from home. How do coaches feel? And they were looking for a way to feel normal and just looking for a lot of resources. And you started to see those coaching clinics and webinars pop up, and just felt like, as a Coaches Association director, to try and keep things as normal as possible for them, to reach out to them and let them know that, hey, there's resources out there, and just trying to touch every sport out there, reach out to every coach and tell them, hey, there's this webinar here with clinics and drills and learning opportunities, professional development. and just communicating with those coaches every week and just letting them know kind of what's going on with that, but also with the LHSAA, any developments going on, and just trying to keep them abreast and of ongoing things, and through March and April and May and into June. And then now that we were back to work full time in June, kind of more things are coming out from the LHSAA on a regular basis. So it's been fun to do that. It's feels like the other day that we were at Burton just 4 months ago, a little over 4 months ago, when you kind of spiral out of control, I guess you could say, with the virus, where sitting in the booth, taking coaches and administrators and athletic directors, looking at their coaches' cards and scanning them in for their admission, and just getting updates on the phone or text saying, hey, can you believe that the NCAA tournament's going to play without fans? And then the next thing you know, conference tournaments shutting down, and then the NCAA tournament shutting down. And then in early March, College World Series being shut down, and just thinking, wow, that's crazy. How can they do this 3-something months ahead of time for the College World Series? And then the next week, the build up, and it's amazing at all the leagues, professional, college, that have been shut down, and of course high school in mid-April, and it's just kind of been surreal. Sometimes you have to pinch yourself and, man, is this really happening? And of course it is. And it's been an interesting ride for sure, to go back from when we were at Burton for the boys basketball championships, and to just see where this has come with the number of positive tests and deaths and hospitalizations, and how serious it's become, and all the measures that have been put into place, and what schools are doing to ensure the safety of their athletes, their coaches and personnel. It's been amazing just to see how everything has come from that time in March to where we are now on July 17th.
Yeah, everything that week that you're talking about, everything escalated so quickly, from a point where we'd started to realize that this virus had reached the United States, and that it was going to be something to be concerned about. But I think it escalated to a point that so far exceeded any of what we could have expected in those first days. As these months have gone on, and y'all have continued to navigate as best you can through some of this, how has y'all's understanding of not even necessarily the virus itself, but just how to handle your day-to-day and handle this process, and keeping people informed, and how to approach some decisions here still on the horizon, developed as we've gotten deeper into this?
Sure. So as you know, the LHSCA, we're in the building with the LHSAA. There's by one letter, I guess you could say we're different, but we're the same. And as director, work hand in hand with all the assistant directors in the office, and of course Eddie Bonine, who's the executive director of the Athletic Association. We work hand in hand, and he and all of us are in consultation with the governor's office, more so Mr. Bonine than any of us, but with him, the Department of Education, the Department of Health, the state legislature. That's ongoing all the time. Mr. Bonine's in talks with them on a regular basis. And we get a heads up on what the governor's thinking, where he may go with his next announcement. So it's cool to be privy to some of that information and to see what's going on with a lot of these things. Just like with anything, as a coach for 25 years, you don't really know what's going on in the building. And what you see a lot of times is just what's printed in the paper or on social media. And to be behind the scenes, so to speak, and in the middle of it is incredible to see what goes on every day. In my wildest dreams, now that I've been a full-time employee here for 13 months, and a little bit before that with being part-time director while I was still finishing my teaching coaching job at Catholic High. Just never would have thought everything that I've seen and been through with select, non-select. And that was the big thing that we dealt with last year. And then to get through that, and then a few months later, then we're dealing with this. It's incredible. So to see all the ongoings and the talks and the meetings, and it's an everyday, it's a 24/7 thing when it comes to this, because everything's so fluid. It changes, it seems, a lot of things every day. A lot of the same questions. Some days it's brand new information that comes out. Mr. Bonine talks with his counterparts, with the other state associations, with the National Federation of High Schools, with members of the Department of Health, Dr. Stewart, who is the head of our Sports Medicine Advisory Committee. He's at Tulane. He's a big wig when it comes to college and even professional athletics. He's the director of return to play for the Athletic Conference, and then also consults with the NFL. So we lean on him heavily. And Ken Bradford, who's part of our executive committee, is with the Department of Education and talks with the governor's main advisors or the governor on a daily basis. So a lot of the information that we receive comes from people that are directly in the know, and all of the variables that go into play there affect any decision that comes out of the LHSAA office. We talk with coaches every day. We talk with Mr. Bonine talks with people at LSU all the time in their athletic department. We'll talk with members of different athletic conferences as well. His colleagues with the different athletic associations, especially in the South. There's so many different people that we talk to every day on a regular basis, especially Mr. Bonine in this office, that we acquire information. We take in information, and we take in suggestions from coaches with their input all the time. So I know it was a long-winded answer, but there's so many different variables that go into this. From it's really 24/7 every day.
Yeah, you had actually hit on some of what I was going to ask next, in terms of just the amount of information gathering from different sources that has to go in, because obviously you guys are not the medical professionals, and you have to listen to some from politicians and government, and stay as in communication with a lot of different directions. And when you had mentioned kind of the way that the professional leagues and the NCAA had shut things down in the spring, that kind of led to different states shutting down a lot of high school levels there shortly thereafter. And so I was wondering how much of a lead you guys take from the NCAA and from an LSU and some of those folks. And I think you kind of mentioned some of it there as you talk about some of those resources.
Yeah, sure. So Mr. Bonine talks with LSU reps a lot, whether it's in the athletic department, whether it's with the football office, whether it's other sports as well, but mainly those two. And looking at what's going to happen with some of those conferences, I think you have to take what they're doing into consideration and weigh what they're doing on the right, with the right amount of input, if you will, with the right, taking the pieces of information that you get. Obviously, the Southeastern Conference is a little closer to home. Taking some variables or weighing the variables of what happens with them into your decision making is probably there because of the geographical relevance and the relevance of that conference and how important they are. I mean, let's face it, if the SEC were to come out and say, hey, we're shutting down football for good, that probably would have a bearing because of how important the geographical area is. And you have LSU, which is, you know, going off of last year, the #1 football program in the country, right? So I think you take into consideration that. You don't take it into consideration 100% of how it affects you with your decision making. But like I said before, Mr. Bonine talks to people with LSU, his counterparts around the Southeast. Section 3, as it's known, with the National Federation of High School Athletic Associations. It's kind of the SEC, so to speak. The same schools or same states that have SEC schools. That's kind of the states that are in the Section 3. And he talks to those the most. Why? Because what affects you in your region affects those states in the same region you're in. So we're all dealing with the same things. It's a fluid situation. You'll see other states come out and say, hey, we're definitely doing this. And then sure enough, the governor will say, hey, things are shut down. So I can't remember what state it was, but some state today, last week said, we're definitely moving forward. And then the governor came in and said, you're not doing anything. And so it's a fluid situation no matter where you are. Things change every day. Texas will come out and say, we're definitely moving forward and playing. And then a few days later, the superintendent of Dallas Independent School District comes out and says, I don't know how we're going to play football at all this year. And then Houston ISD came out recently and said, virtual school through October 17th, I think it is, and no extracurricular activities until then. So it's an ever-changing situation. We look at those things. You take those things into account. I get so many texts and calls or emails from people every day, and the texts will roll in and it'll say, hey, just thought you should know this. And it'll be showing what Virginia's doing or what New Mexico's doing or Michigan. And it's one of those things where, yeah, I haven't said anything to anybody, but it may not be news to us because Mr. Bonine will say, hey, just to let you know, New Mexico is probably going to do this. Lo and behold, 48 hours later, that comes out. No surprise. And then within 5 minutes, I'll get 10 texts that say, hey, look what New Mexico is doing. Yeah, so we kind of know those things, but sometimes it's new information. So you process everything, you take all that into consideration. It's cool to be a part of it. I'm definitely not the end decision maker, though, and that comes up with the executive committee, of course, and Mr. Bonine's direction with them.
With, I guess, so many different sources of information, and in a time where we as a country seem to have a lot of conflicting information flying around on pretty much any topic that comes up, and this being such a complex situation with so many different factors in terms of, obviously you don't want these student athletes to lose a season ideally, but you have to worry about their safety. There's also kind of a mental health and other aspects of their well-being component that I think gets overlooked by some people at times, and just so many different angles to this. And even when you try to look toward a solution, and some people advocate for flipping the fall and spring seasons, and some people raise questions that could bring into the picture. How do you guys, within some of these conversations, try to prioritize or balance so many different competing information sources and components to ultimately one giant complex situation?
Sure. So one thing, not to get away from that, but you mentioned mental health, which is absolutely a very underrated and a subject that's not appreciated enough. And I know we'll talk about the clinic later, but we have a great speaker that's going to talk about that, about mental health and prevention of teen suicide. It's one that hits home to me, for me, because, you know, I've had ex-players, I've had relatives, I've had friends, playground teammates, that going way back to when I was 13 or 14, that, you know, all through fairly recently, you always know somebody that's been affected by that. But now it's it's something that really needs to be discussed. It's kind of it should be on the front burner. And that's something, a part of getting back to normalcy and getting these players or getting these athletes back to school in a normal situation and giving them the opportunity to play. That's a factor that comes in that's not lost upon us with getting these kids back. That's one of those things that just, it goes unspoken, but getting back to normalcy, I think that kind of, you know, encompasses a lot of things. But that's one of those things that we always think about, getting back to normalcy and the safe return for everybody, whether it's players, coaches, staff. There's, like I said before, there's so many different factors that go in. You'll have pieces of information that are talked about in a meeting, and then somebody amongst 5 or 10 people will talk to one of their friends about it, and then by the time it reaches somebody else, that information has been skewed. So whenever we have a meeting, it's interesting to see how the information that gets out there. For example, we had a football advisory meeting last week, and we said, hey, coaches, bring that back to other coaches, tell them what's going on out there, get that information out there to your friends, to the coaches in your district. And there was about 15 people in that room, and accurate information is being given out from one coach to the next. Well, when someone mentions it to the media, or a writer will say, or a TV person will say, hey, I heard y'all had a meeting. Yeah. And then, yeah, no plan's been discussed, but, you know, there's a framework or a skeleton, if you will, of possible plans going forward. And then someone sees some dates somewhere out there on Twitter or Facebook or something like that, and then they try and match it up and then move forward and say, hey, I hear this is what the LHSAA is doing. So those things happen, and that's where the don't believe the hype came in there, and just to try and make sure accurate information is out there. Understand that people aren't, coaches included, aren't going to like what's put out there sometime. You're always trying to make sure that people have accurate information. Just like with coaching, you don't reveal all the work that goes in with counseling players, what you're doing at practice, who might have been sick that day, all those different things that go into your game plan. And then you play a game and you worked real hard, and then the result isn't there on game night. Same thing that happens to us here at work. You know, you put in a lot of hours, a lot of thought, a lot of consulting with experts, and then sometimes because of other circumstances like this virus that's ever changing, and you have to deal with what the governor says with his phases, and sometimes things don't work out to your advantage. But, you know, sometimes people want more information, and because of that, their quest for more information, and we may not be able to or ready to put that out, then sometimes people create their own narrative, and it'll get off the rails sometimes. I know people want more. Sometimes you can't give more for different reasons, but there's always work going on. Just like I gave someone the analogy last week, you got that NFL team that goes 2-14, and they're struggling on the field, and those coaches are in there working long hours. Same thing with the players. The fans will be like, what are they even doing in that building? You know, I drive by the facility when the Saints were bad, going back 15, 20 years ago. I drive by the facility on Airline Drive, and they still have the lights on at midnight. You think they'd be doing something to win, right? And I use the same analogy that there's a lot of work going on in those programs that are struggling in the NFL, those teams, and they don't tell you what's going on. The Patriots are very successful. Belichick's not going to tell you and release, hey, exactly what's going on, just because they can't for some reason, or you'll learn down the road. So sometimes we just have to be patient with that information. When I was a coach, I wondered a lot of times, hey, when are we going to learn about this? When will this come out? And sometimes we just need to be patient and realize that, you know, that normal calendar we looked at as coaches, when you can scrimmage for the first time or put on pads for the first time, because of different circumstances, especially like we're dealing with now, those dates, we just have to clear that out of our head and realize it's not normal and work off of that. And when we can get there, we get there, and just be confident that we're working at this, and we have things that eventually and hopefully in the near future that we'll be able to get out there, so that everyone has confidence that, yeah, we are going to get this thing underway once we can get this under control as a state and move to the next phase, which would be phase 3, of course.
The message, I guess, has been pretty consistent that there is full commitment to getting to fall sports. For you guys, as we kind of see the state being stuck in phase 2, I think a lot longer than a lot of us were anticipating initially, how do y'all kind of balance sort of the trying to do everything you can to make plan A work versus having some possible contingencies in place, and particularly you with a football background and knowing the amount of preseason work that we can't just turn around and start playing live tackle football in a full capacity next Friday, for instance. It's a bit of a process. How do you view sort of I guess, how much lead time needs to be there for football to get back if we do get to a point where make a decision? What kind of, I guess, vague timeline needs to be in place before a definitive move potentially has to get made for whatever the contingency may be?
Sure. So when it comes to fall, we have 4 sports that start around the same time: swimming, cross country, volleyball, and football. Everybody wants to talk about football, of course. The work goes on in this building with all 4 of those sports. If football were to have a later start, it's because it is a contact sport. You have to get past phase 3 in order to play football like we know it, where you can scrimmage an opponent or have a jamboree against an opponent or play a regular season, whatever that may look like. Volleyball can play in phase 3. Cross country and swimming have less restrictions, so they would be able to compete. And so I tell people all the time, that football is not going to hold other sports hostage. We're all about all sports. Talking with a number of football coaches that get together and talk about the sport of football advisory committee. Every coach in there, the vast majority of them are athletic directors. 100%, it's unanimous that all sports are important, and we need to make sure that every athlete in every sport has every opportunity to play. Sympathetic, there's sympathy, there's empathy, there's compassion shown for those sports that lost their seasons in the spring. What happened was very unfortunate. It was disappointing. Being around Mr. Bonine every day for 16 months now, probably the toughest thing he had to do was to say the spring sports seasons are over, and that was really tough. It was definitely the toughest day I've seen him have since I've been working with the LHSAA. It was the right decision, though, because of what we know now about the virus. We know more now about it than we did in April, but it was the right decision. But moving forward to the fall, never has there been any talk about canceling the season or not playing any of the fall sports. One of the options, of course, for football is to possibly flip seasons. That's gained a little more traction as we get deeper into this. I would say, me personally, at no point would I have been a fan of that until we stayed in phase 2 back in June. And Mr. Bonine a few weeks ago was not a fan of it. I think after talking to his colleagues and realizing, hey, what we're dealing with is more open to that, is more flexible to that. It's still the third option out of the 3 options that you could see that kind of mirror what you see when you talk about football. It kind of mirrors what the NCAA is looking at, Jared, is the third option is flipping to the spring. And the Ivy League went ahead and did that already. The Ivy League is an animal in itself, as we know.
Yeah.
It's different from the Power Fives, even the Group of Fives. Even though it's an FCS school, it's a little different than most of the other FCS conferences, right? But when you look at that and kind of parallel it to college football, option 3 would be to flip. And then you have option 1 is to try and start on time as much as possible. You may have a delay in a few weeks, but to play the regular season as we know it fully. Same thing with the playoffs. And then option 2 is a delayed start with some modifications to your regular season and or postseason. So what we've been looking at from that standpoint when it comes to football is that it kind of marries up to what the NCAA is. It may not be the exact same thing, but when you talk about plans, they kind of run parallel to each other. So all the different options that we have and we've talked about and we've seen, all the different contingency plans, you could kind of group them into 3 groups. And as we've gone along, you kind of start to look more at, all right, you have 3 different categories here. Where does this kind of schedule look for the football season? Where does it get thrown into? So, there's all kind of different looks you could have for flipping a season, when you start, when does it end, how many games you would play. And so all of those different schedules people could come up with get thrown into option 3, so to speak. Where you'd start if you had a delayed season, if you played 8 regular season games or 7 regular season games, if you played 5 weeks of the playoffs or 4 weeks of the playoffs, or however it would look, that would obviously be an option 2. So when it all comes down to it, there's probably hundreds of contingency plans that are out there that are starting to get narrowed down, I guess you could say, because at some point there will be a D-Day, so to speak, where you say, hey, look, this is when the final, or this is when a plan gets released. This is how things are going to look. There may be a possibility where you come out in the next 7 to 10 days and say, here's a rough sketch of how things will look for football. And it would be for football, not because swimming or volleyball or cross country are any less important, but just because they have fewer restrictions to get to where they normally could play. Like volleyball can play in phase 3. Sure, they'll have modifications where at the net, there may be special netting to separate the 2 sides. The huddle in between points may be eliminated. The use of the same ball on consecutive points, that's probably out the window. Shaking hands at the net after the game, that may be out the window. But there's fewer modifications you have to take there than you do when it comes to football, obviously. Cross country, just to give you an example about this, do you start a race with everybody in a mask? And then at some point at the mile point, does everybody discard their mask, because then it's strung out a lot more? At the beginning, do you have a staggered start? Do you fire a gun and then a few minutes later, do you fire the gun again to have the same competitors in the same race but with staggered starts? That all depends on where you are phase-wise, and then decisions that are made with, say, the cross-country advisory group. Adam McDowell, who's the assistant executive director in charge of cross-country, who was an Olympic trials competitor in the marathon, who has a ton of experience, a wealth of knowledge there. So just giving Adam an example as someone who's in charge of a certain sport that consults with different people around the country every day. And that could go for any sport. And then you have swimming as well, where, do you, instead of 6 lanes or 8 lanes, is it 3 lanes with 1 lane open in between competitors? So those are things. And then if you've ever been to a swim meet where you have all these competitors packed in and fans in there, do you have that? Do you have fans in the natatorium, I guess you could call it, or in the pool site that houses the pool? Do you have all of that, all of those competitors and fans in there? So just in the last 3 minutes, talked about 3 sports that there's so many different modifications and questions that go in, and we'll be getting more guidance on that, and then of course giving out guidance. But there's so many different variables that, as I just showed, that goes into it. You can't just all of a sudden say, all right, we're going to play overnight. And that's what everybody wants to hear. And that's our goal, to make sure that everyone plays. Nothing right now has never entered our minds in this office about canceling anything. The move is to play fall sports. When we start, how it looks, it'll probably be different, of course. But our goal is to move forward and definitely play these sports.
I think as this summer has gone on, you mentioned kind of your perspective and Mr. Bonine's perspective changing some, being a little bit more open to the potential flip if that has to be the case. I think we've seen some initial reactions from folks around the state that realize, this plan doesn't sound great compared to what they're used to in a normal world. And as we've seen and been reminded at every turn how not normal our circumstances are, where everyone's starting to realize, okay, this is not ideal, but not much right now is ideal. So we have to figure out whatever steps we need to take to have the best option for these kids to be back out there on fields or courts or in pools or whatever the case may be ultimately.
Yeah, sure. So it's interesting because, like I said, it changes every day. You get new information every day, it seems. You learn something new every day. A different healthcare professional will get with us, and something new may change, some new thinking at least. So there's a different variable every day that you need to weigh in, and it's interesting to see how one piece of the puzzle can change so many different things.
Yeah, no doubt. And I told you I wanted to ask too, with as hungry for work and competition as a lot of these young athletes are, I mean, we see it a lot on the football side in terms of guys trying to get together and get some other training in. And the high school teams are able to get some work in right now. We're just in a certain phase where there are certain restrictions. As you go through the process that you guys go through on a daily basis of trying to find whatever answers or plans you can, and you see some of this other work outside of the association going on, what are kind of your initial thoughts or perspectives on, or what do you hear from maybe some of the high school coaches about that? Because there's certainly work you can get in safely, but with it being outside of the realm of y'all's organization, it has to be concerning to wonder how that is being handled from a case-to-case basis.
Sure. So as you mentioned, it is concerning. It's unfortunate we see that. You go to different places and let me tell you this, the coaches and athletic directors and administrators since June 8th, when summer rules went into effect, it's incredible the job they've done. And we've commended them so many times in emails, in interviews, in print, on TV, on radio. And again, I just want to say thank you to them, because the job they've done is tremendous. And they do a great job. Why are we all in it? Those three groups of people, we're all in it together, administrators, ADs, and coaches, for kids. And our number one job at the LHSAA, along with school personnel, is for the health and safety, the welfare of student athletes. They've done a tremendous job. I can't tell you how many people between mid-May and June 8th talked to me, and even after, about what they were doing to prepare for the return to campus of those athletes so that they could start working out and doing things for conditioning. The measures that they were going to practice, sanitizing, social distancing, taking their workouts outside, all of those different things. It's an incredible task that they've undertaken, and the job they've done is incredible. Of all the positive tests that we've seen from schools or from school districts that just relay it to us, they're not obligated to do so, but they just like to let us know. Those positive cases have all come from the outside. It's nothing that's taking place at schools. You know, you hear some criticism about that. Yeah, well, if those schools wouldn't have opened up for workouts, and you might not have that kid or even a coach test positive. Completely false. All those schools, they're doing everything they can to make sure that those kids are safe. And when you see those kids go home and for the weekend, hey, as an ex-coach, over the break during quarantine from mid-March until June 8th, a lot of kids found ways on their own to stay in shape, to be ready for the June 8th opening. And they did some great things on their own. Right now, with the way things are in our state with phase 2 and being asked by the governor to social distance, and now you have the mask mandate, and you see videos that come out. We talked about it before we came on, about the safety of that. As you mentioned, you were concerned about going to an event to cover and wondering, hey, is it safe for me to even go cover this event? And when you start thinking about that, then I really think it's right there in front of you. It's full blown to the seriousness of this. And hey, are others going to be practicing this? If an event's being put on, are the people putting on the event going to practice safe measures for these kids? You want to see kids get in extra work and really get out there and promote themselves and give themselves an opportunity. A lot of these kids to have a shot to play at the next level. But some of these events, you see video on social media, and kids are standing shoulder to shoulder at these events. Some have masks on, some don't have masks on. There's contact being made, one-on-one pass rush drills, contact, and just what we've learned about the virus and how it can be spread, as simple it can be spread. It's something that kind of contradicts what our coaches are doing and athletic directors and administrators are doing and preaching on a regular basis to ensure that the kids on campus stay safe. And then they may go to this event, whatever it is, whatever sport it's in, and you see things taking place there, and measures aren't safe measures aren't being taken. A lot of coaches have mentioned that to me over the last month and a half, upset about it. Unfortunately, at LHSA, we don't regulate summer rules, and there's some things that are going on when they leave campus, and some things that are coming to our attention, people not following guidelines that were recommended by our sports medicine advisory committee, whether it's the LHSAA or the National Federation of High Schools, that we're having contact, we're having 7-on-7. We don't regulate it. It's always been that way with it's summer rules time on the LHSA calendar. But when it comes to following these safe guidelines, just ask people to follow them, to follow these recommendations. Strongly urge people to follow them for the health and the safety of their athletes, and that we can get to phase 3. Once we get there, I think there's light at the end of the tunnel, but we're all in this together. We've got to be great teammates. We're not going to agree all the time with decisions that are made, things that other programs do, but we can be a great teammate to each other and get to phase 3. Once we get there, then all sports will look the same.
If you still have time to talk some about the clinic, I know I think if you and I start talking about pretty much anything,
here all day.
Yeah, we could talk for forever. But if you have time, I really wanted to let you talk some about the coaches clinic next week, Monday through Thursday. Sure. So all of the speakers that you have on board, well over 100 speakers who are going to be resources for coaches around the state to come together in this virtual setting, has been another piece that's been on y'all's plate to organize this huge event for next week. As we now get close and are just a couple days out, what's kind of the expectation of how that's going to work out in these, again, kind of weird circumstances where it's going to look a little bit differently in the presentation, but still such a long list of tremendous speakers that are going to be there to fuel some of this conversation.
Sure. So I'll start at the beginning with it. And like you said, we could sit here and talk all day about high school sports, you and I, as we've done for quite a few years now. Going back to March, fully expected to be in person at the Crown Plaza back in Baton Rouge, in that normal spot where coaches expected it to be. It was in Shreveport, had a 2-year run there. Those people were great. Surveyed the coaches last year when I first came in, said, hey, we want to get back to Baton Rouge, and back in July. Vast majority of coaches said that on both accounts, geographically and on the calendar. So we did that. A lot of excitement. Things go on. You move into April, in communication with Leslie at the Crown Plaza. We have a great relationship with them. And our annual convention is hosted there every year. And you didn't want to see it be taken away. You didn't want to have to cancel the event. Got to May and just had a LHSCA Executive Council meeting, unanimously decided to go virtual. Watching those clinics and webinars in March and April and seeing some great stuff put out there. The group that's doing our clinic, Coach Tube, is incredible. Coachesclinic.com is kind of the sister site that's run by Coach Tube. And those guys have been incredible. So we spoke to them back in May, ahead of the time that we unanimously voted to make it virtual, just in case. If we decide to go virtual, we wanted to have a plan in place already. They said they'd pick it up and run with it. So once that happened, we started reaching out really ahead of time to those speakers that were coming in person live in July at the Crown Plaza for 2 days, and just securing them for their spot virtually. we were able to do that with the vast majority of speakers. They agreed to go virtually. Well, then wanted to make it as great of an event, great of an experience as possible for all of our coaches, athletic directors, and administrators. And if they couldn't be there in person, make it as great possible virtually. So extended it to 4 days, because where you attend the clinic can be anywhere. It can be in your car, it can be in your living room, can be in your office, it can be in your dang bathroom, really. That's how convenient this is. So convenience was great, but also wanted to make sure every sport was represented. All 16 of our sports are represented, along with cheer and bass fishing, which are non-sanctioned LHSAA sports, but bass fishing will eventually be one. And then professional development and performance nutrition as well. Wanted to get some of those out there and give our coaches some opportunity to see some speakers in those categories, if you will. So this has grown. It's been, again, to go along with what we deal with every day with the virus and return to play, which takes up the vast majority of our day. This does, for me, because it's a coaches association event, it takes up, it's a 24/7 event as well. So you got 24/7 things going on, and just balancing that has been tough at times, but making sure our coaches and our CA members have a great experience, that's paramount. That's why we're doing this and why it's 4 days stretched out, and we've got some tremendous speakers on the schedule.
And folks can see a long list of those speakers on the website. Obviously, Coach Orgeron, Coach Will Wade, Dee Bro, and Nikki Fargas, and a lot of the coaches from over at LSU, a lot of coaches at the college level from around the state. Ron Hunter down at Tulane was another one that stood out to me. But you guys cover bases of in-state, high school, college, professional, out-of-state, same thing, all of those sports you mentioned. You had mentioned a really important talk with mental health components involved next week. What are some of those sessions that maybe people, if they're initially thinking, okay, these are some of the topics I'm probably going to expect to hear next week, what are some of those other topics that that maybe might not be the first thing that come to some coaches' minds, but you're really excited to see some of those topics covered by some of these speakers through the course of the week?
Sure. So a couple years ago when I was at Catholic High, Jamie Meeks from the Saints and the Pelicans, she's the head of nutrition for both of those organizations, which are housed at next door to each other on Airline Drive in Metairie. She came out and talked, was a tremendous presenter. And now we have the opportunity to bring her in. And it's a little tough because the Saints are going into camp pretty soon after. So her schedule was interesting to try and fit her in. She did everything she could to help us out, and she does a tremendous job. So looking forward to her, a former LSU baseball player, Dr. Brett McCabe. He's a sports psychologist. He's done a lot during this quarantine time with with various topics, dealing with student athletes, dealing with coaches. He'll be on board. Dr. Amy Bender from the University of Calgary is a sleep expert and how sleep can affect your performance in a positive and negative way. Blair Napolitano from LSU is with compliance. She'll be talking about eligibility and recruiting. I mentioned student athlete mental health earlier. David Martin, who's a Hall of Fame high school football coach from Tennessee. Now he works with the Jason Foundation, which was founded to be an advocate for student athlete mental health. And Chris Four, who's a former football coach in California. Learned about him because he was a special teams coordinator He's written some books on special teams, and is now a principal. Got into administration. He's now a principal for the first time, and he's going to talk about interviewing for your dream job and putting together a resume. And so there's a few topics on there that are a little different, but I think our coaches can really benefit from them. And the good thing is if I tried to make it to where those were standalone sessions, but if they're not, the one great feature about doing it virtually is being able to watch the replay. And if you're on a vacation or on a cruise for some reason at this time, but if you can't get access to it, if you're out of pocket, so to speak, you can come back and not only watch the replay, but there's a lifetime access option for you where you can click the ticket button up top, and you can have lifetime access to not only our stuff, but to all videos on CoachTube, and there's thousands of videos for coaches out there. I've had people call and ask, hey, I'm not a coach, how do I get access to it? You go to the website, which is LHSCA.coachesclinic.com, and you click the ticket up there, and there's an option. So if you're a member on there, there's a login button. If you're a CA member, login button, you click it, and your email is in the system already. If you're not a CA member, that doesn't matter. There's a ticket option which you can purchase to see all the great speakers that we have on board with us. You mentioned all the LSU coaches. Beth Torina from softball's out there. Coach Chris with tennis. He and his dad are the co-head coaches. Coach Bro, when you look at her, you're like, wow, she's been there 43 years. That's amazing. But we've got some great speakers. I think there's 8 Division I head women's basketball coaches that are presenting. It was really fun to reach out to all these coaches and get in touch with them. And, I could probably write a book in the last few months on reaching out to them, communicating. And I'd say 95% of them, all of these college coaches, dealing with them, 95% of them have been very receptive and just really open to the fact that, they want to give back to coaches. Some you reach out to don't get back with you. That's kind of those that are in that 5% category, so to speak. Some will ask for money that's not in our budget. Some will ask for money that's not in the budget of Fortune 500 companies, right? So, so like I said, I could write a book on it and just talk about the great stories, and then I would have one chapter on that, probably call it the 5% chapter, where you learn about different things. But you have coaches out there that don't get back to you. Some do. Dabo Swinney was a great example. Reached out to him, got back. Coach, I have a family commitment. I think it was a vacation, but got back. Hey, would love to be a part of this in the future. So, a bunch of NFL guys were interested. One NFL offensive assistant, I'm not going to tell you the team, but he wanted to and had his topic picked out and said, hey, we'll do this. And said, I think I'm good. Let me just clear it with the head coach. And he talked to the head coach, didn't get back to him, no response through a text because they're not in facility at this time a month ago. And then asked him again, called him or texted him back, and the head coach called him back and just said, hey, are you effing crazy? That was, or actually the word was, are you effing kidding me? That was exactly what the head coach. And if I put it in a multiple choice, you'd get the head coach. It's not Belichick though, but that's close to Belichick though. But there's your hint. But we've got a lot of NFL guys that said, hey, I'd love to talk to it. So talking with Dwayne Jenkins, who's the president of the Louisiana Football Coaches Association, the Coaches Association, He's the AD at Lutcher, head football coach. I talked to Dwayne and I said, hey, one thing I've kind of come up with is, hey, let's have a virtual football clinic, because a lot of these NFL guys, some college head coaches like Dabo can speak there. Get some of these other, just because the schedule is so tight right now with walkthroughs being added. And one thing that's unfortunate that LSU can't do anymore at their March clinic, if you remember, Jared, is the high school coaches that their teams would win the state championship. LSU would have them back to present at their coaches clinic in March.
Right.
And that was something that was kind of a perk of winning the state championship, that you'd get to talk to LSU. I remember one time, now some of them don't like it, but I remember one coach in particular going to find him after his team won a state title and give him a big hug and congratulate him and tell him, man, what a great job. And his comment was, yeah, great. Now I got to present at LSU in March. But it's great for those coaches to have a platform to promote their programs, and it's something that they deserve. And that's something that Dwayne and I talked about with some NFL guys getting to talk, some big college guys, to bring those 9 state champion high school coaches back sometime in March. So that's just one example of where this virtual clinic can go. We'll be back at the Crown Plaza next year for 2 days, of course, and people want to be there to see people they haven't seen in a year. And you want to be there. Hey, you know, a coach has 4 D1 recruits. Hey, what better spot to corner Coach X than at the Crown Plaza? Hey, I'm going to be there. I'll be in town. Hey, let's meet up. And I want to talk to you about all 4 kids. And he also gets to promote his program. That's one thing that's lost with not meeting in person. Just the camaraderie among coaches. And it was fun to me for being a young coach. Looking forward to that, because that was on my radar as a young coach. I look forward to that. It was great time for staff retreats, so to speak, where you get to hang out all together. You'd go hang out wherever the social was that night and meet other coaches, build new relationships, because that's what coaching is all about.
Yeah, it was always or is always such a cool week of the year. I always look forward to state championship time and coaches clinic time as like big every half year reunion sort of moments where everybody gets together. And so it's definitely unfortunate to lose that aspect, but I think it's very exciting to see what you guys do have available next week, and all those resources. It should be a great week for everybody to get together, at least virtually, and then hear some of those speakers and pull some from those resources. Yeah,
sure. I'm just excited about, you look at the roster of speakers in each sport and the depth of it's incredible. When you do it in person, I learned last year, you start off asking a few people. And because I learned if you ask a whole lot of people, the hit rate isn't very good. And I'll give you an example with baseball last year. Asked a bunch of people from the sport of baseball to speak. And just because recruiting is so big in June, where it was on the calendar last year, a lot of guys had things going on. They were going to watch their players play in summer leagues. They were coordinating recruiting trips and all that with their assistants, a lot of stuff going on, vacations with their family, or they couldn't because they were playing in NCAA regionals, right? So it was kind of tough at that point. So this year with baseball, I reached out to like 16 baseball head Division I baseball, or 12 head Division I baseball coaches. Within a week, like 9 of them said, yeah, I'm in. And so you're like, man, this is great. And then the other 3, 2 of them said, yeah, I'm in. And then you're looking at your schedule and you're like, damn, a month later, did I overdo this? So that's an example of how scheduling is different for in-person to virtual. And it's just like with everything, it's a learning process, but it's been fun to deal with these coaches and to see their skill sets when it comes to use of technology as well. And, their innovation when it comes to topics as well. Just saying, hey, do you want me to just lecture? Is it question and answer? Is it a PowerPoint? Do you want video? It's interesting to see some of these guys where they are. You've got guys that won hundreds of games in a sport, and it's amazing. Hey, I don't even know how to press play on my laptop to show a video. And then you'll have some in there that, hey, can I do this? That just kind of wows you when it comes to their level of technology and understanding maybe what coaches want. And you're like, dang, I would have never thought that this guy who's a Hall of Famer would even know how to do something like that. But it's definitely been fun to talk to all of these coaches and to see what these coaches want to do for other coaches, because that's what it's about. Coach O and his staff, they're great. It goes without saying what they do for us, and we've got a great relationship. Last year when we were in Shreveport, they flew in early one morning, Coach O, Coach Aranda, and Joe Brady. And Joe Brady was kind of brand new coming from the Saints, and people got to see a glimpse of him. And everybody knew about Dave Aranda already, and everybody hopes for the best with him at Baylor, of course. And you reach out to some coaches, and Tom Herman's been great with from Texas, and Lincoln Riley, great from Oklahoma. And what's refreshing is they both like, hey, we want to do anything to talk to you guys, to your coaches, to your football coaches. And that's how it's been. But when you get into football, sometimes those guys that they have the big programs and they're multi-millionaires, you think sometimes, something will get to their head. They forget where they come from. But it's refreshing to see guys like Coach O, Lincoln Riley, Tom Herman want to do whatever they can to get out there and talk about their brand. Yeah, they compete against one another. Coach O is going to be at the Texas coaching school the day before he speaks to us. And, hey, get on out there and talk to as many coaching groups as possible and get your brand out there. It used to be not long ago where people were real sensitive to who came and who spoke and who did what. But, there's a bunch of players out there, and LSU can't get them all. ULL, Tulane, Tech, Southern Grambling, Nicholls, Northwestern State, McNeese, ULM, all of those schools, Northwestern State, Southeastern, Louisiana College. I think I got all of the football playing programs in our state, but they can't all play for Louisiana schools. So I think it's great that other coaches get to really sell their brand to our coaches. I'm just using football as an example.
Yeah, I run into some feisty fans sometimes on Twitter if I am happy for a Louisiana athlete that's doing well somewhere, maybe at another SEC school or something along those lines. But at the end of the day, you've got young student athletes getting some opportunities to go to college, continue their athletic career and their academic career. So having those connections is great for the college coaches with the high school coaches, and just kind of getting a sense of what those programs are all about. And you guys have a lot on the list. And again, folks can find that in the coaches clinic section of the LHSCA website and find the access there as well as that gets started on Monday.
Yeah, again, LHSCA.coachesclinic.com. Coachesclinic.com people, they've been great. Sister organization to the much bigger CoachTube. Very professional organization. You can go to coachtube.com and look at all the videos they have, and the website that they've done. They've done all the work for us with the website and uploading pictures and setting the schedule. They've got the template down pat. They do such a tremendous job, and I know the success of this clinic, they'll have a heavy hand in that.
No doubt. It's going to be an exciting week. And I appreciate you taking some time to chat with me about everything going on, both in terms of trying to navigate back to as safe and close to normal of a school year as we can, and then getting ready for this coaches clinic next week. Because as we mentioned, you've got a lot on your plate. So I definitely really appreciate it, Coach.
Yeah, thanks for including me and reaching out and inviting me to do this. And anytime, I'm open to anything that can promote high school athletics and anything for coaches. And we could sit here and talk all day, as you mentioned before. We're both long-winded. I talked a lot more than you, believe it or not.
Hey, if we can find the time to do this more regularly, I'm sure we'll have plenty to talk about any given day that we can link it up. Thanks again, man. Again, he's Coach Eric Held, the director of the LHSCA, getting ready for that coaches clinic next week for Louisiana versus all y'all. Jarrett Roser. Thanks again.
Thanks, Jared.